Thinking about a prenup, it's not a prediction of a divorce, it's protection. In Texas, a prenuptial agreement is the smartest way to protect your assets before you say, I do. Let's break down what it is, what it covers, and why it's more common than you think. What is a prenuptial agreement? In Texas, we are a community property state, so you can presume that anything you acquired during the marriage is going to be community property, unless, of course, you inherited it or it was gifted to you. So you can presume that during a divorce, your community property is going to be divided, potentially equally 50-50 down the center, if not 60% to one spouse, 40% to the other, or another combination of percentages. However, if you have a prenuptial agreement, it can lay out what you will do with your assets, your debts, your reoccurring income, your real estate, your businesses. It will establish what is going to happen upon a divorce. A prenuptial agreement can give you control over your assets in your future instead of putting it in the hands of a court later on for them to decide who's going to get what. Another thing a premarital agreement can do is establish clear expectations regarding spousal support. So if you're going into a marriage and you have a disparity in income, we can establish in a premarital agreement what the spousal support will be, if any. It is very common that in a premarital agreement, someone puts that spousal support is waived. This is allowed. So later on down the road, if there is a divorce, the spouse cannot claim a lot of money from you or any money from you at all in a spousal support request because it's been waived in the premarital agreement. What can be included in a prenup? We can include how we're going to divide debts, how we're going to divide property, how we're going to divide income, how we're going to pay our bills as a couple during the marriage, what account we're going to pay the bills out of, what happens to that account that we're paying bills out of and potentially both contributing to upon a divorce. We call that usually a household account, how we're going to divide that. We can also divide personal property via a prenup. You can also include things like an infidelity clause. If one person cheats, then we can put something in place that the other party gets a certain amount of money. This can get a little dicey later on, but it can be included in your premarital agreement. We can also put into a premarital agreement something called a sunset clause. What that means is after a certain amount of years, the premarital agreement would become void or no longer in effect. So the parties can say, if we've been married for 25 years, this premarital agreement is no longer going to be valid. What can't you put in premarital agreements? Well, you can't do anything that's illegal. You can't do anything that's going to defraud someone else. You also cannot put anything in your premarital agreement that goes against public policy. And one of those things are going to be child support or child custody. Those things cannot be in a premarital agreement. So you cannot contract that one person is going to pay the other party child support. That is going to go towards a best interest standard, and it's not something that can be contracted between the parents. How do you make a prenup valid? It needs to be signed voluntarily by both parties, and it also needs to have full disclosures of assets. Both sides need to make a full disclosure of their assets prior to entering into the contract. That can be one way to invalidate a premarital agreement if there wasn't a full disclosure of assets. Can you cancel a premarital agreement or change it? Sure, you can contract around a premarital agreement just like you contracted to have a premarital agreement. Should you use the forms online to do a premarital agreement? No, the forms online could not have the most updated laws. They may be poorly written and not clear, and it might be easier for someone to get out of a premarital agreement if it hasn't been written by an attorney or at least reviewed by an attorney. If you want to protect your assets, your family, and start your marriage off with clarity, give us a call. We'd be happy to help you navigate a premarital agreement, whether that's reviewing the premarital agreement that's already drafted or drafting one for you so you can begin your new family.